Hi everyone, I'm Annabelle Yeomans. I'm a senior analyst at Ampere Analysis. For those who don't know Ampere, we're a data research and analytics firm specializing in media, content, communications, and gaming. And we're based in London in the UK. Thanks very much for dialing into our presentation today. That will be looking at how consumer attitudes and behaviors towards content are changing and what this means for the industry. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I'll be talking to you about some of the changes we're seeing in how consumers interact with media content. We'll start with which types of platforms consumers are using and how this has changed over time, as well as the types of platforms that have actually benefited from the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on other platform types. We'll then look at the increase in binge watching content, including the markets where it's most popular and the demographics of binges. As well as that, we'll look at the genres of content that appeal most to them and how new and existing content providers can engage with them. We've seen that the platforms consumers use to watch content are changing, which is benefiting many of the big players in the market. It's important for all content providers to understand these shifts in order to ensure that they can adapt and stay relevant in a changing market. There's a few things we can conclude from the research we've conducted so far. This chart shows the proportion of internet users who have used one or more online video service in the past month. When we consider that there was a lockdown between Q1 2020 and Q3 2021, this data is particularly interesting. We can see that those people who have used SVOD services in the last month, which is the orange line, and that's platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, users of these platforms continue to grow through to Q1 2021. And we're now up to more than 2/3 of consumers using them regularly. What I do think is interesting through all of this is that we're seeing the persistent underlying trends continue. SVOD is still closing the gap rapidly on social video services, so that's services like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, etc. We have broadcaster video on demand services shown by the grey line. This would include the public service broadcaster-led platforms such as BBC iPlayer in the UK, and its European counterparts. We can see that subscription video on demand services have powered away from these BVOD services and in recent years have opened up a significant gap. Pay TV operated TV everywhere services still have a niche user base. They've had relatively consistent monthly use throughout the time we've been running our polling. These are still very much used for second screening while in the house or if you're on the go. Although the latter is probably less likely to be happening at the moment, given the high proportion of people working from home and limited domestic and international travel. So what else is changing? We've seen these huge spikes in linear viewing behavior and people were tuning back into broadcast TV. And there's a question as to whether some of that behavior would be sustained. Would people who see the content on offer via broadcast be drawn back to some of the channels which they may have forgotten about, and then persist as lockdowns begin to lift? To some extent with certain demographics, we know that this has been the case, but I think it's fair to say that for scheduled TV across younger demographics, that change was perhaps broadly more temporary. So this graph shows claimed viewing behavior. So in the survey, we asked consumers how much time they think they spend watching any TV or online video across a number of time periods across the week and weekend, and also what platforms they watch it on and what devices they use in that time as well. We then sum all of that up and calculate an average amount of claimed viewing. Now, this is probably a better reflection of appointment to view TV. People don't tend to remember when they just have the TV on in the background that they watched the news or had it on while they were cooking, but it will reflect reasonably well what they remember tuning in at a specific time to watch. What we've seen is a steady erosion of linear TV viewing and a big increase over the last few years of subscription video on demand in particular. If you trace that back to Q3 2017, over the course of the last few years, we've seen the amount of time consumers think they're spending with SVOD services more than double. The increase in SVOD viewing has been across all age brackets. this chart breaks down the self-reported SVOD number into the different age groups we're polling in our survey. While it's certainly fair to say that the 18 to 24 age bracket spend the most time watching SVOD services, what is particularly interesting is that the 55 to 64-year-olds and the 45 to 54s have seen significant increases year on year. It's grown by around 48% from Q1 2020 in the 55 to 64 age group and around 51% among the 45 to 54s. In fact, what we're seeing is that each age bracket is about 12 to 18 months behind the next age group. So the 55 to 64-year-olds viewing is about 18 months behind where the 45 to 54-year-olds are, and so on. Now, this could imply, if you take it to its logical conclusion, that in the course of 7 to 9 years, we'd be looking at 55 to 64-year-olds spending about the same time viewing SVOD services as 18 to 24-year-olds are currently doing. I think it's probably a bit too early to conclude that this is the case. We've been living in unprecedented times, so these current behaviors may be slightly abnormal, but nonetheless, it does illustrate how quickly behaviors and viewing patterns can change if the conditions are right. We're not only seeing these shifts in the type of content that consumers are watching, but also in the way they're watching content. The increase in SVOD viewing has encouraged some interesting shifts in consumer behavior. One type of viewing that has seen an increase in the last 5 years is binge watching. So that's the proportion of respondents who report regularly watching several episodes of the same TV show back to back. SVOD services typically easily allow for this type of viewing, as they often drop full series of new shows all at once, allowing consumers to watch multiple episodes in one sitting. From Ampere's consumer polling, we can see that globally binge watching has been steadily increasing since 2015, and it's definitely here to stay. Europe, which is the blue line in this chart, is still behind North America, where SVOD uptake is particularly high, but Europe has seen a 17% increase in binging compared to 11% for North America, showing that growth is particularly fast in the region. If we look at the percentage of binge watchers in our European markets now compared to 3 years ago, we can start to see which markets have been key in driving this change. Sweden and Denmark have seen a much larger than average increase than other markets. 37% more respondents in Denmark report binge watching in Q1 2021 than in the same quarter in 2017, and Sweden has seen a 24% increase, which is likely to be linked to a high uptake of SVOD services in the region. On the other hand, we can see that Germany has seen the level of binge watching in the market remain relatively stable, which reflects the much lower engagement with SVOD in the market. The link between binge watching and SVOD services is further supported by the subscriptions held. We can see that binge watchers are 12% more likely than average to have access to an SVOD service in their household. In fact, the data suggests that they're more likely than average to have all types of media subscription. This underpins the importance of this group, not only for SVOD platforms, but for linear platforms too. Bingers represent a group who are much more engaged with media and are willing to spend money on the content that they want. And as we see engagement with SVOD services continue to grow, it will be important for linear broadcasters to ensure that they can also appeal to this group. If we look at the age breakdown of binge watchers compared to the SVOD and BVOD viewers, we can see the challenge that this poses for broadcasters. The age demographics of binge watchers are very similar to those of SVOD. They're more likely to fall into those younger age brackets than BVOD viewers. One trend we are seeing in the data is that binge watchers are slowly getting older, with 32% aged over 45 in 2015 compared to 38% in our latest wave of data. So this trend is moving relatively slowly, but as it moves into the core demographics of linear TV, broadcasters will have to ensure their release schedules align with how consumers want to watch content in order to hold their audience. So what type of content should those looking to appeal to binge watchers be investing in? This data shows the favorite genre of binge watchers in comparison to the catalogs available on SVOD and AVOD and BVOD services. From the bar on the left, we can see that crime and thriller is the most popular genre, followed by sci-fi and fantasy and comedy. These genres are particularly popular among binge watchers, reflecting how bingeable programs are within these genres compared to things like sport, documentary, and news, which are less likely to be a favorite. If we look at this data in comparison to the catalogs available on SVOD and AVOD and BVOD services, we can see that the top genres amongst bingers make up only 15% of the content on AVOD and BVOD services, whereas for SVOD services, it's 26%. This shows that the genre mix among AVOD and BVOD services is much less synchronized with the preferences of binge watchers than it is on SVOD platforms. You can argue that it's even more important for AVOD and BVOD services to be aligned with the genre preferences. Their ad revenue is contingent on consumption, whereas for SVOD platforms, revenue is decoupled from consumption because if people keep paying for subscriptions, how much they actually view doesn't really matter. So what we're seeing is that this shift in viewing behavior has implications for all platform types. Broadcasters aren't currently in a position to capitalize on binging behavior, as the genres they offer on their BVOD services don't reflect the preferences of this audience. Increasing investment in genres like comedy and crime and thriller could help them to engage with binge watchers. Broadcasters, studios, or cinemas looking to launch their own streaming services should also be mindful of these preferences, and they should consider binging platforms in their release schedules where possible and structure them to meet the needs of these audiences. Some broadcasters are already doing this. For example, Channel 4's All 4 in the UK keeps many of its programs available as box sets, which gives it a much larger catalogue in terms of content hours than its competitors. This allows binge watchers to sit and watch multiple episodes on the service. Established streaming services can also capitalize. On average, TV seasons make up 78% of content hours on SVOD platforms in Europe, which provides a vast amount of content for consumers to binge on. There's an opportunity for these platforms to build out their sci-fi and fantasy and action and adventure content to further cater to these audiences. Thanks very much for listening. If you have any questions or would like a copy of the slides presented, please contact info@ampereanalysis.com.